You are tuning into the Lehigh Low Ego, High Impact Mindset podcast. I'm your host, Volkan Emre, along with a dynamic team of Kellogg School of Management alums. We are here on a shared mission to uncover the mindset that drives impact and success. On Lehigh, we have thought-provoking conversations with incredibly successful entrepreneurs, business leaders, and investors from around the globe. We uncover the mindset that drives them, allowing them to make a high impact without losing themselves to ego. Now, let's get started with today's episode. This episode features Abdol Moabery, a serial entrepreneur, a prominent philanthropist, and a community service champion. Abdol is the founder, president, and the chief executive officer of GA Telesis, a global leader in integrated commercial aviation services. Abdol is a distinguished alum of the Kellogg School of Management's Executive MBA program, and he is a graduate of Florida Atlantic University, where he recently served as the chairman of the Board of Trustees. This episode is co-hosted by Dhaval Shah, a distinguished oncologist and a Kellogg Executive MBA alum. Abdol, thank you very much for being with us today. It's really, truly an honor to have you with us on the Lehigh Mindset podcast. And I want to thank Dhaval as well, Dhaval Shah. Both of you are distinguished members of EMBA 129 Kellogg Executive MBA and cohort. So Dhaval, it's also an honor to have you with me here to interview Abdol. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Abdol, we have a tradition to start with some rapid fire warm-up questions. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's go.
Okay.
So let me start with the first question, Abdul. Coffee or tea?
Coffee, and lots of it.
Wow. Dogs or cats?
Dogs. They are always happy to see me.
I guess you live in Florida, but I still have to ask this question: mountains or beaches?
I'm a beach guy for sure. I love the mountains. I love to see them. I don't like the cold. So beaches, 100%.
Text or call?
Ooh. I'm a call guy. I prefer to speak to someone. It just, from my perspective, they know exactly what I'm saying if I'm speaking to them. On a text, if I use the wrong punctuation, a question becomes a statement.
Okay. Music or podcast?
Podcast. I'm a big, music is great. I love to listen to music, but, podcasts just, I get so entrenched in what I'm hearing. And I think from podcasts, if I've got time, I want to learn something. So always podcasts.
And a follow-up question. If you have time, would you consider starting a podcast someday?
I would love to. I just think that podcasts are such a great way from getting a perspective from somebody about a topic and doing it quickly. So if I ever had the time, I would absolutely do it. I think it's brilliant.
PC or Mac?
I'm a PC guy. For business, PC just for, I should say my business, PC just works better. And, when you travel around with the laptop doing presentations, you always know the PC is going to work. The Mac, it depends on the country.
Now, we still have to ask this question despite, you being with GA Telesis. So drive or fly?
100% fly. Time is our most valuable resource. It's one of the few resources where, we don't know when the resource will end. So from my perspective, I want to use that as efficiently as possible. If I could teleport from place to place, I'd pick teleport. But since I can't fly.
Wow.
Awesome.
Okay. What's worse, dishes or laundry?
Boy, it's almost like my wife. So my wife is the person that makes you almost completely wash the dish, if not wash it before you put it in the dishwasher. So it kind of feels a little redundant. And then on the laundry side, I you know what? I hate laundry. I hate doing the laundry. So I will say laundry is worse, exponentially worse than dishes.
Wow. Okay.
So, just one more warm-up question. When you wake up first thing in the morning, what's the first tab do you open on your phone?
I hate to say that it's my email, but it's my email. Running a global company, there's, very fortunately, there is always 24 hours a day, there's somebody working. And inevitably, someone from some region of the world has a question. So when I wake up, I've got Asia opens, Oceania opens, and then Europe opens, and I get all those questions. And I like to come to the office and have sort of a clear mind to think about what I need to do that day, not respond to 20 emails. I've already responded to them. I wake up, thanks to Dhaval, I wake up around 4:45 in the morning, so I'm fresh at 5. Dhaval gave me a book once called The 5 a.m. Club, and I read it. I've always been an early riser, so for me, it wasn't a chore to wake up at 5 a.m. So I wake up at 5 a.m. and while the book actually says not to read your emails and respond to them, that is exactly what I do. So I do that. And then if I'm going to do any kind of exercise or anything else, I do that after the emails so I can do the exercise with a clear mind.
So I was still hoping that your answer would not be email.
Yeah. Unfortunately, look, I have people sometimes waiting for a response right when I wake up, and they love the fact that I wake up at 5 a.m. and respond to them. And, as crazy as it sounds, when you guys get past 50 years old, you'll often have to wake up in the middle of the night because you're over 50. And I don't have to go any further than that. And I will respond I'll just grab my phone and I'll look and see if there's anyone that has any questions. And I'll respond to emails at 2:00 in the morning if I have to.
Well, thank you for sharing. And this was really a very fun rapid fire questions session and an unforgettable one, honestly, for me. So thank you very much for sharing your insights. Abdol, can you start by giving our listeners a brief introduction to your background and your impressive and impactful journey to founding and growing GA Telesis?
Sure. So I was born, I'll go back in time. I was born in Iran and I came to the United States when I was 1. So I am still, I'm an immigrant. My kids are first generation Americans. I grew up originally in Washington, D.C., and then my family transplanted to Los Angeles. And I, for the most part, grew up through college there, joined the Navy, went to university, loved airplanes and everything about airplanes. I learned a lot about airplanes in the Navy, and ultimately decided that I took a job with an aviation company, and things worked out really well. I worked really hard. Had a couple of jobs, which we can get to later on if you like. And 8 years after university, I started GA Telesis.
So, after that move, before you founded GA Telesis, could you describe us, Abdol, what made you decide that, or was there a particular moment that you decided to start GA Telesis? I think during our conversations in the MBA program, you always emphasized us, like, find some issue in your workflow and try to maybe create a business out of that workflow. So what was that moment for you? Maybe we call that as a sliding door moment.
Sure.
And, what did you learn from it, and how did you eventually, start GA Telesis?
Sure. So I'll start it this way. I'll say I was about to take a job. I was working at a hedge fund in New York. This hedge fund had hired me some years prior to work with their group that invested in aviation type businesses. So from airlines to maintenance businesses to aircraft finance companies, they did all of those things. And I was brought in to really, when there's a gestation period on assets, and when the gestation period came to the point where the asset was becoming mature, it was my job to find a market and sell the asset into that market. So that's what I did. Well, things in this was sort of the late 90s. Things got bad, and because of the .com sector, and the .com sector was hurting our fund in a lot of ways, and and beyond that, there was just not a lot to buy that wasn't something .com. And our boss, our CEO, came in and said, "Look, if you've got any ideas on businesses that we should build, instead of buy, why don't you write up a plan and see if we can fund it?" So I wrote up the business plan for what the original GA Telesis was, which I'll explain in a minute. And I shared it with my boss, who thought it was a good idea. But when he took it up higher, they said it was too capital intensive, and no thank you. So my boss gave it back to me and said, "Hey, your deal didn't get approved. So here it is. It's yours. Take it back." So at that point, I had to make a decision. Did I really think it was going to work or not? Now, I wish that was a quick decision, but it wasn't. It was more along the lines of, I could read the writing on the walls at the fund that things were not going to get better for a while. And in fact, during that period, leading up to that period, I got married. My wife and I worked at the same company together. So we, when you're working 18 hours a day, you don't have a lot of time to make friends. So luckily, my best friend, which is my wife, worked there as well. So we got married. We actually eloped. We went to Thailand. My wife became pregnant on the honeymoon. 9/11 happens. So I'm fast forwarding. And our son was born, and I'm now at sort of a crossroads. Do I continue to work, or do I do my business, my business idea? Now, in most cases, common sense says, after what happened in 9/11, I won't say what common sense says. I'll tell you what the investor community said. The investor community said I was nuts, that investing in anything related to airplanes after what just happened in 9/11 was crazy, and they wouldn't do it. They thought potentially that the airline industry was dead forever, and that it was never going to be the same. Now, they're right. It's not the same, but it is very much a robust industry today. Now, that said, I decided to talk to a few folks about what was available in the market. And immediately I had 2 job offers to go work for companies in the aviation, sort of commercial aviation sector. And one of them was sort of like a dream job for me. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go work for this particular company, and this company I was just absolutely enamored with the leadership of that company, and I wanted to work there. And one night I sat down with my wife and I was like, so here are the options. I can go work for this company. It's a great living. We'll be very comfortable with me working for them, and I'm sure I can move up in the company. Or we can try to raise the money that we need to fund my idea. And, her response was, look, we're young. We don't have a lot to risk here. And if things don't work out, if you do this and they don't work out, then go get that same job. But if you don't do it now, you're not going to do it. So go do it. So it was her encouragement, to take the risk. And that is the hardest thing to do when you got a wife and kid, that is to go out and quit your job and have no income. But she was right. In the end, if that company that wanted me, that made me the offer, wanted me, they would want me in 6 months or a year if things didn't work out. So I took the plunge. I didn't accept the job. I quit my job. I went out and finally found an investor that would match me dollar for dollar in the investment. So it was 50-50 to start. And April of 2002, I formally launched first day at work.
It is a fascinating story. Thank you for sharing. It's probably possible to say that your wife is one of the founders of GA Telesis then.
Oh no, it's definitely. So look, when we started and our son was a baby, my wife was the receptionist. Because I didn't have money for a receptionist. I needed somebody to answer the phones. I started off with 6 people, and I'll tell you, and none of them wanted to answer the phones because they were all executives. So just to talk about my wife's role, she was absolutely the receptionist, and then she was a bookkeeper for a while, and she did all the projects that needed to get done that I couldn't or didn't have the time to do. She would do. She, as we grew, she did our integration for our M&A activities, and then she managed all of our sort of global real estate. And then about 7 years ago, I was incredibly frustrated with our head of marketing, and I asked her if she would take over marketing, and she doesn't have a degree or any experience in marketing, but I told her that I would help her. And she took over, and now she's the head of global marketing for the company, has been for 7 years. She's got a big team. It was just her to start, and now her and her team, I don't even know the metrics, but the amount of marketing that we do, the dollars we spend, the interactions that we have, the impressions that we make are almost at an infinite level these days, thanks to her commitment. And you know what? The greatest thing about it is that the company is in her blood. She's been around since day one. So she is absolutely my co-founder of the company.
Thank you for sharing. And for listeners who might not be familiar, with the company, could you describe what GA Telesis does and the primary industries it serves?
Sure. So we are a commercial aviation ecosystem. Everything we do goes to support the commercial aviation sector, so the airlines. So the simplest way, if you ask me, to describe it in a sentence, what we do is we provide services to airlines that allow them to fly passengers from point A to point B and do it on time and safely. But there is obviously a lot more to that. We have 5 divisions of the company today. I'll go through them really quickly. Our flight solutions business is basically an airline supply chain. We provide the parts and the supply chain resources, including supply chain financing for airlines to manage their parts that they need the replacement parts they need to keep their airplanes flying. We have distribution centers around the world, and our job is to get a part to an airline before there's a flight delay. So that's one of our biggest businesses. Then we have a group called MRO Services. MRO stands for Maintenance, Repair, and Overhaul. We repair parts of the aircraft. So we now have three divisions. We have a component division. We basically repair all the parts of the aircraft, most of which you can't see. They're in the belly of the airplane or in the cockpit. We repair those at a location right at Miami Airport. Then we have a landing systems repair station. We repair aircraft landing gear and restore them for airlines. And then we have an aerostructures division where we repair the components on the outside of the airplane. To put it simply, they repair all the parts on the airplane that you can see. Those three divisions are under our MRO services business, and I would say that they are one of the most or fastest growing divisions of our company. In fact, on a net basis, they grew during the COVID-19 pandemic while others shrunk, and that's mainly because we stayed in business the entire time. Then we have a group called LIFT. LIFT stands for Leasing, Investments, Financing, and Trading. Our LIFT group, simply put, is a financial institution. It provides lease and financial services for the airline industry and all those in it. So as you might not know, about 50% of the world's airline fleet is leased. They're not owned by the airlines. The airplanes are leased by companies like mine that buy the airplanes and then lease them to an airline, and they use them for a period of time, similar to a car lease, and then they return them, and they may go to a different airline or get converted to a cargo plane or whatever disposition after. And we've been doing that almost since the inception of the company. But where we've become different over the last sort of year and a half is we also became a lender. And now we're, in simplistic terms, while we're not a bank, we are a transportation bank for the airline industry. We loan money to airlines and financial companies, other leasing companies that want to lease airplanes to airlines. We will loan them the money to finance the aircraft, or the jet engines. So that's been a fantastic business for us, especially as interest rates rose. The sort of openness from airlines to lease airplanes versus taking debt on them has increased, but it's also the banks have retracted their lending businesses. So the banks are loaning less money, so it makes us much more relevant. Then we have a division called Gates, which is GA Telesis Engine Services. At Gates, we repair and overhaul jet engines. Those engines that we do are the most common engines in commercial operation. Every 737 and A320 flying. Those are which are the two most common engine models flown. We repair and overhaul. And that's, as I mentioned, Helsinki, Finland. Great business. It is our biggest business by people because it takes a lot of people to do that particular function. And then finally, we have a group called DIG. DIG is something I started about 5 or 6 years ago. It's called our Digital Innovation Group. And within the DIG group, we're spending a lot of time on technology and technologies to advance our industry. So we're spending a lot of time around the functionality and sort of building purposeful uses of the blockchain for the airline industry. We're also big, or we're trying to be big in AI. I've built a full data science team, loaded with a whole bunch of PhDs with different disciplines that are focused on building the next evolution of GA Telesis in an AI world.
There's so much to digest like here. Thank you very much for breaking it out. Really, I've been taking notes for myself, honestly, as something solid from the skull. Seriously, thank you very much. And everything you just said, and we're talking about here a global organization, right? And I'm curious, that will allow me to ask this question. So when you were bringing these new concepts, I really remember the supply chain financing portion of it. Like I think when we met at Kellogg, this was one of your focus areas. Like when we met, your mind was occupied with that. So how do you pilot and scale these new business models? Do you always start from the US and then scale it like to the rest of the world? Or what is your approach in making these solutions global?
Yeah, so the first thing I identify is the problem that I'm trying to solve, right? So in a supply chain finance element, what I realized was that banks were having difficulty financing inventory for airlines because the parts move in and out so fast that the banks can never understand what their loan to value ratios are because they don't know where their inventory is, right? So for instance, an airline, let's just take an American airline. American Airlines has inventory in Dallas and Tulsa where their major hubs are, but they also have it in 57 other locations around the world because if the airplane breaks down in Tokyo, they need a part there too, right? It's just not automatically there. So the banks were struggling with it. So we created a solution to provide a financial tool for airlines to use to allow them the flexibility to have access to the inventory, but not own it. So I own it, and they can move my inventory anywhere they want in the world, and they just pay me a fee to lease it, to rent it for the period of time. And those leases are typically 5 to 8 years, but I've got them as long as 14 years, depending on the aircraft model. But to answer your question about how to scale it, so first and foremost, my first deal was not in the United States; it was actually in Europe. So it didn't. It doesn't have to start in the United States. It starts where the opportunity was, and in that case, it was in mainland Europe. But it starts with people. I can't do everything because I've got to run the company, and when I have these ideas of starting a new program, it starts with identifying the right person to lead that business. So it always starts that way for me, and it's sort of when I have an idea, I say, who can I find that will, number one, be able to understand the idea. Number two, that will be able to execute on the idea. And then finally, the most difficult one is someone that can keep up with my imagination. And that is because I'm constantly changing things. I'm constantly asking questions. I'm constantly asking people to stretch, to do things maybe differently or in new markets, and it's a lot. So when I find someone that can do those three things, I bring them on board and I task them with what I'm trying to pilot. The most recent was our digital group. In this particular case, I got very lucky because I was really struggling finding somebody to pilot the program. I just didn't. We looked and we did full searches, and either we couldn't find the right person, or the person that we did find was already some huge guy at Amazon or something and wanted $1 gazillion, and we couldn't afford him. So luckily, my college roommate, who I'd never worked with, but we lived together, over 30 years ago. He and I sort of reconnected. He had received his PhD. He was actually working on Wall Street, doing analytics and running a fund. And he was looking for something different. And I said, would you consider, joining me and doing this for me? And he said, you caught me on the right day. And next thing I know, he's here and, building a team, and it's been incredibly impactful. And I can tell that same story with every division. And look, sometimes it doesn't, it doesn't start with the right person, but when you find the right person, it. And that is, for anyone out there that's looking to start a business, one of the hardest things is people. And especially early on, when I was just starting, I mentioned earlier, I was going to come back to this. I started with 6 people, which included me. And that doesn't include my wife, because I never paid my wife a penny until about 7 years ago when she took the marketing job. She just did it because she was my wife. She worked here. I guess she got $1 a year to be an employee, but she never got paid until 7 years ago. And by the way, my board made me pay her, so I wasn't even going to pay her. So the 6 people I started out with, so it was me. And then I brought in a chief operating officer, even though I didn't have an operation, but I knew I would. I brought in a chief financial officer. I didn't have any money, but I knew I was going to, so I wanted to make sure I had the right person there. I had a head of sales. His job was that when I had something to sell, it was going to be his job to sell it and build a sales team. I brought a head of IT, and his job was to build us a network, because we on day one we had 1 laptop. And then I brought in like an operations guy to just do stuff for us, because we had big ambitious plans. So I remember when I was talking to my partner at the time, my co-investor, and he's like, "Whoa, all these big salaries, what are you doing?" And I said, "Look, I'm not building a business, I'm building a company. And a business needs a bookkeeper. A company needs a CFO. And we're talking big dollars in terms of what I plan to do. And I need to start off with the person that understands what we're doing on day one." And that was the absolute right thing to do, is to allow me to do my thing, because I had an operations guy to run the operations. I had a finance guy to run the finance. I had a sales guy to run sales. I had everyone in place. They were all professionals that I believed in and trusted to do it. The challenge comes later as you grow. And as you grow, that person that joins you on day one when you had 0 revenue may not be the right person to help you run the business when you're doing hundreds of millions of revenue. But they're your friend. They've been with you since day one. And the challenge that I really struggled with was when you have to tell your friend and, sort of colleague of many years that the company has just outgrown them, and that you have to separate because they're not capable of doing the job. Now, interestingly, in some cases, they're relieved, because they think they're letting you down. So while I'm thinking that, a certain person isn't doing their job, they know they're not doing their job, and they know that that they're letting me down. So it was for me, it was a really tough time as the company transitioned, and in 2007 I sold 49% of my company to Merrill Lynch, which became Bank of America. And as we institutionalized the company, because I was part of this giant financial institution, it became evident that I had to do more and more of that, and that was really hard.
So thank you very much for sharing. And honestly, you answered a lot of the questions like we prepared for this podcast. So you basically made our job easier in this particular case. Yeah.
So, maybe we'll take a little bit of shift in what, we have gone through so far. And thank you for giving us, all the work that you have done with GA Telesis, but maybe taking a little bit of shift into what you're doing on your social impact and philanthropy work. So, you have built such an amazing company, and now you have the opportunity to drive the huge social and impactful changes. So could you give us, your insights and how GA Telesis is doing it at a business level, and then, how you are able to do that at a personal level as well?
Sure. So let me go back. So when I was growing up, my family never had enough money to be philanthropic. Culturally speaking, philanthropy was part of my culture. Helping those that can't help themselves was always a cultural thing. But financially, my parents weren't capable of providing any kind of financial support. So it wasn't something that I grew up seeing. And frankly speaking, when I was in the military, part of your advancement in the military was your sort of contributions to society. Like, what are you doing outside of the military to help people? So part of getting promoted was that, like, what kind of social impact are you making? So I learned a little bit there. And then, you as you grow in your career, you see more and more opportunities to be philanthropic. But it wasn't until I met George Batchelor, who's the G in GA. So if I didn't say that earlier, GA Telesis is George and Abdul Telesis. And George was, when I started to become close with George, he was a philanthropist in the most impactful way. He really focused on how he could impact people, society. And he always wanted to see, and something he taught me was, you want to see the benefits that are received from the impact you're making, because that always makes you want to give more. And interestingly, that always stayed with me. And, I asked him at one point, how do you know when you've given enough? And he says, he said for him, and I now have adopted the same thing. The more he gives away, the more he seems to get. So, call it karma, call it whatever you want, but it's worked for me too. Now, for my wife and I, at one point we decided we had to sit down. So we were almost at the beginning, and this is something George was very supportive of. We decided that we were going to make a social impact in the communities that we serve. So I was in our first operation was in a really bad area of North Miami called Opa-locka. And in Opa-locka, it was urban development zone. It was impoverished. And I was there because it was cheap real estate, but there was a lot of people in need. And we immediately reached out to the community and found an organization at the time called His House Children's Home that we wanted to help, and we did. We made a huge impact on them, and and 100% driven by George and his foundation, but we made an impact. But when you see it, and we can see what that impact is and how it affects people, especially children, then you want to do it more. So my wife and I at one point sat down and said, all right, we have to write sort of our mission statement for philanthropy. And it was really, it was serving the communities we serve. Serving those in the communities that we serve that can't help themselves between the age of from birth to 22 years old. And the reason we picked 22 years old on the back end is because, especially in the United States, but we've now learned everywhere, when somebody turns 16 in some countries, 18 in this one, if they're a product of the system, if they're an orphan, if they're in the foster system, they get a kick out the door and they're told, you're an adult, you're on your own, leave. And they have nothing. So something my wife and I have been working on a lot lately is supporting organizations that help those young people that have no direction. They have no family, they have no money, and the state or government, wherever they are, has basically told them, you're an adult, go make it on your own now. But they don't have anything at all. So for us, that is a big part of what we do. But really helping kids in all areas to have the same opportunities that we've had. And look, you don't need a lot of money to have opportunity. You just need opportunity to have that opportunity. And in some cases, kids don't have the opportunity. It doesn't take money. It just takes a chance. And we want to make sure that the kids have access to that chance. And that's what we focus on. So when GA Telesis started getting into philanthropy, it was sort of the Abdul and Kathy show, right? We did it and everybody did it because we did it. And I asked my wife to be the president of our foundation, our charitable fund, and she agreed to do so as long as I let her have control of it. And one of the first things she did was empower all of our leaders to do what we do by basically assigning each of them a month in the year where they're responsible for philanthropy. Now, they could vastly do whatever they wanted to do, but it was their job to do something philanthropic. And it has been a complete culture change at our organization. The amount, I'll say this, just because we're global, 7 days a week, there is something charitable happening at one of our offices around the world. Literally, we are doing something to help the communities we serve every day of the week. There is something going on to do that. And that is important. And when people leave here to go somewhere else, our hope is that they take that culture with them.
Abdul, thank you so much. That is hugely impactful from what you are doing on a personal level, and of course what GA Telesis is doing. Having achieved so much, I think you have been asked these questions many times, but now that we have all graduated from Kellogg, could you maybe give us some insights into, what has been the Kellogg impact for you, both personally and professionally? And, how do you kind of see yourself maybe in the next few years from here?
Right. So, I got asked why I went to Kellogg a lot, almost every month. And, the simple answer is I love to learn. And it wasn't always, I didn't necessarily feel that way when I was younger, but at some point in my life, I just had this thirst for knowledge. And I realized that I didn't have all the answers. As the CEO of an organization in a meeting, I'm often the quiet one. I just listen because I want to hear what others have to say. I know clearly I'm not the smartest person in the room, or especially when it comes to specific areas of the business, right? I can be in the room with my accounting group. They're way smarter at accounting than I am. Their brain power is way more powerful than mine. So by listening to them, I can learn. My Kellogg experience was one built around learning. And, I'd been out of college for a long time, decades. And I wanted, and well, during that period, the biggest companies in the world formed, right? The Amazons, the Apples. Apple existed prior, but it was not what it became. And what I wanted to learn about was what led those companies to become what they became. What was it that they did that might be different than what I've been doing? And maybe I could apply that to what I was doing and help me grow the company at a better pace and perhaps more effectively. So I went in thinking that. What I got out of it was different, though, because most of my learning came from people, the people I met at Kellogg. And I have the benefit of really knowing two cohorts, right? Mine and the one just, well, maybe three, the one just ahead of us for a little while and the one behind us. But what I learned from those people, my classmates, was unbelievable. And it wasn't anything specific. I can't point to one thing, but I would get called aside by someone saying, "Hey, can we have dinner? I'm thinking of starting a company, and I want to pick your brain because you did it." So then I would have dinner with them, but I would learn so much from them during that dinner. And I would think about, well, you know what? I didn't think about that when I started my company. That's a different thought. And how can I apply that to what I do now? So I would say, just to be fair to the school, I learned a lot. I would say it's something like I learned 60% sort of technical skills, like academic skills, and 40% people skills. And the people skills didn't come from Kellogg. It came from my classmates.
The question about Kellogg, you gave a graduation speech when we were graduating in Chicago. And I've been thinking about your graduation speech regularly, and which had a great one-liner: "Don't work to survive, but work to thrive." I think when founding GA Telesis, as you also highlighted during this podcast so far, this was your mindset. Part of your mindset, I believe.
To be fair, it was my wife's mindset, right?
Yeah.
Because I was going to take a job, right? And she basically, not using those words, because I didn't come up with those words until I wrote that speech, but that's what I was thinking. She said, we don't have to do you don't have to work to survive. Do what you want to do to thrive, right? And I wanted to start GA Telesis. So it really, those words are, even though they weren't exactly as I put it in the speech, those were her words. Her actions. She enabled me to go out and thrive. And perhaps that is one of the hardest things when you're starting a business to go off and do is not think about your ability or your need to survive, but rather needs to survive, but rather what you need to do to thrive.
Yeah, these are really strong words, and because they are really strong, I've been thinking about them quite frequently. And thank you very much again for this speech. It was wonderful. With that, as we are coming to the end of the podcast, getting closer, I'm curious, what advice would you offer to aspiring entrepreneurs, business leaders who are seeking to make a significant impact similar to your achievements?
Okay, so that's the word you used, impact, is the driver of what I'm going to say. So the first thing you have to decide when you're going to do something is, are you going out to make an impact? Are you building a business? Or are you building a company? I met both types in Kellogg. I met those that say, look, I want to build this business. This is what I want to do. I don't want to grow it that much. I want to make it comfortable and build a nice sized business for myself. And that's fine. But other than the customer you deal with on a day-to-day basis, there's no impact. So if you're trying to go out and build a company, and that company's goal is to build an impact, then you have to do just that. You have to do things that are outside of your comfort zone. And, as I look back, I had to do a lot of them. Number one, I had to convince my investor that I needed a group of executives to work for me before I had anything to do. But that was something that enabled me to focus on building the business and building an impact. Then I looked at my industry, and I noticed in my industry that we were behind the times. And probably about 6 years in, and all the while from the point up until then, when something didn't make sense, and I would ask somebody, I was like, why are we doing it that way? They would say, well, that's how the industry does it. And I'd say, well, I don't like it. It's dumb. Like, why would we do it that way? And when you research it, you go back in history and you're like, well, they've been doing it that way since the 50s. So that's why we do it that way. So I would change things, and I would hit a lot of resistance from the industry. Say, well, wait, that's not how things work. And it's like, well, look, that's how things work at GA Telesis. They don't have to work that way with you, but that's how they work here. And then slowly I noticed that our systems and our philosophy on how we do business started to be adopted by the industry. And in about 2008, we had hired a company to sort of work on our branding. And we were in this brainstorming session, and I was talking to him about the way we did things differently than the rest of the market. And we came up with this tagline, which was intelligently defining aviation. And he said, look, here's how the market's going to take it. They're either going to think that you're brilliant, or they're going to think you're arrogant, because who are you to define aviation? And I said, well, you know what? I think it'll set the standard, it'll set the bar at a level where I have to constantly feel like I'm doing something different, that I'm making an impact. And I worked on it. We adopted it, and we just started to do things a little differently than the market. And by doing them differently, we were outgrowing our competitors. We were becoming bigger and bigger. And I would say, in my industry, we have a company that's been around since the early 1950s. They are the world leader at what I do. But I've been in business now almost 22 years, and I'm second. So I've caught up. So I'm getting to that point where all of these decisions, all of these initiatives that we've taken are paying off and working. And a few years ago, as we were looking at especially around DIG, the things that we're doing to revolutionize our industry, we changed the tagline, and we are now intelligently defining the future of aviation, because we want to make an impact. We want to be, when people look back at our industry, at our sector, we want to be remembered as the leaders of the industry, as opposed to a participant in the industry. So from my position, what your company does throughout its cycle, if you are making an impact, it is going to be known, and the company will benefit, and the leaders will benefit from that.
Abdul, thank you very much for sharing your insights, your story, your mindset and vision with us and with our listening audience. It's been a pleasure having you and having this discussion. Thank you very much, Dhaval, for your amazing contribution to this discussion. Any closing words?
I just wanted to thank Abdul and Volkan for both of your time. It's been a pleasure.
And I'll end it by, number one, I'm incredibly honored that you asked me to be on your podcast. And I've had a lot of fun seeing you guys. So that's great. But I will end it with the statement that you say impacted you. And that is that, for those in your audience that are thinking about making a change, it is time to stop doing what you do to survive and start doing what you need to do to thrive. Thank you.
Thank you for diving deep with us on another episode of Lehigh, Low Ego, High Impact Mindset. Join us every week as we discover the stories, strategies, and insights that will empower you to grow personally and professionally. Stay inspired and catch you in the next one.